Welcome to Better Health for a Better World, a dedicated podcast series that shines a spotlight on global health projects and programmes supported by the Government of Ireland across partner countries in the Global South. I'm your host, Nadine Ferris-France, and together we'll embark on a journey to explore the remarkable initiatives transforming lives and communities around the globe. This podcast aligns with Ireland's international policy document, A Better World, which serves as a framework for our discussions. Each episode will feature interviews with one or two speakers who are at the forefront of implementation. Get ready to be inspired by the incredible changemakers working tirelessly to build a healthier and more equitable world. So welcome back to Better Health for a Better World. And in this episode, we shine a spotlight on the critical topic of sexual and reproductive health and rights in Sierra Leone, with a specific focus on adolescent girls and young women and the pursuit of gender equality. Today, I'm delighted to welcome two guests to the show. We have Ambassador Claire Buckley. She's the Ambassador of Ireland to Sierra Leone. And she's joined by Josephine Kamara, who is the Senior Advocacy and Communications Manager at Purposeful, a feminist hub for girls' activism based out of Sierra Leone. You're both welcome to the show today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Nadine. Great to be here. Hi, Josephine.
Yeah, hi.
So, Claire, I might just kick off with you and asking you if you could set the scene a little bit about Irish Aid's work in Sierra Leone, a little bit of background on the partnership and the history, just to help us understand the context a little bit.
Sure, Nadine. And it's a question I'm often asked, actually. Why does Ireland have an embassy in Sierra Leone? So we first opened a representative office in Freetown in 2005, and that was to support long-term reconstruction and development following the devastating civil war. And we were working in really close cooperation with the Sierra Leonean government and other partners like the UN agencies, international NGOs and local civil society. But then in 2014, that representative office was upgraded to a full embassy, reflecting the importance that Ireland places on our relationship with Sierra Leone and our long-term commitment for its development. But of course, Irish links with Sierra Leone go back so much further. Irish missionaries have worked in the fields of health and education for over 150 years. And many Irish have continued working in Sierra Leone over the decades. And the country is still held in great affection by Irish people, as demonstrated by the Sierra Leone-Ireland Partnership, which recently celebrated its 30th anniversary. And nowadays, there are many Sierra Leoneans studying and working in Ireland, including a growing number sponsored under the Ireland Africa Fellows Programme. And I think you met one of those recently.
Absolutely, Claire. We're meeting the fellows all the time, and so impressive and really wonderful to be able to engage with them here in Ireland, for sure. Yeah, thanks for that. I think it would be interesting as well, Josephine, I might just come to you and ask a little bit about Purposeful. I'm fascinated by the name, such an interesting name for an NGO. Tell us a little bit about Purposeful and how Purposeful addresses these unique needs and barriers faced by adolescent girls and women, and how Purposeful supports them to be able to access sexual and reproductive health services.
Thank you very much for that question. It's very hard to talk about purposeful work if I don't set the scene, give a little bit of background on girls' life in Sierra Leone, because most of what we do was sparked because of girls' reality in the country. So, for example, adolescent girls and young women in Sierra Leone, we know for a fact that they face many challenges with regarding sexual and reproductive health rights, some of which are limited to access to information and education on comprehensive sexuality, which sometimes contributes to lack of knowledge about what sexually transmitted infections are, how they are transmitted, about contraception, about how young women and girls can prevent unwanted pregnancies. And basically, these conversations are looked at as taboo in the space. And because of this, there's stigma and discrimination around young women and girls seeking understanding on sexual and reproductive health rights issues, and often prevent us from seeking necessary care and support as and when needed. And this ultimately contributes to the high rates of, teenage pregnancy in the country. In fact, Sierra Leone is considered one of the countries with the highest rates of teenage pregnancy in the world, which in turn have negative consequences on girls' health and most times life-threatening results, considering the high rates of maternal mortality rates and according to the WHO, the maternal death ratio for this country is 125 per every 1,000 delivery for adolescent girls. So all of these conversations, when we look at the bleak future and reality for girls in the country, when we look at access as a whole, when we look at the complex realities that girls have to go through, navigating safety in school, living in communities when they're pregnant and kicked out of school and not being able to go back to school. And even though policies now exist, but I'm giving a background and context based on when these policies did not exist. These were all the things that were happening, compounded by the Ebola outbreak when about 14,000 girls got pregnant. And then the government came up with a policy to say all of these girls were not allowed to go to school. And so we started existing because of that. There was a clear call that girls need people to represent them, but apart from needing people to represent them, girls need people to work with them to represent their views and opinion. So this is how Purposeful started in Sierra Leone. We are a feminist, African-rooted hub for girls' activism in the globe, but we are centered here. Our headquarters is in Sierra Leone, but we have blueprint in over 100 countries around the world. And most of the work we do is girls programming. We amplify girls' voices. We resource their resistance. We support the feminist allies that work with them. And most importantly, for the partnership and relationship with Irish Aid, is we work with this bilateral donor organization to be able to amplify what girls are doing in the country, but also work with government agency to shift policies, laws and policy. So we are known at the center of shifting a lot of discriminatory laws and policies in Sierra Leone, like getting pregnant girls into school, getting the Sexual Offences Rights Act refined, amended in the country. So a lot of that we're centered and working with and for girls in making sure it's happened. So basically that's Purposeful, not in a short description, but Purposeful as a whole.
Thank you, Josephine. That's a super description. And just as you're talking about, amplifying the voices of young women in Sierra Leone, and it's just such a pleasure to hear your voice speaking about these issues. And Claire, I might come back to you. I mean, that's really shocking. One of the statistics Josephine mentioned there is like 125 deaths in every 1,000 deliveries among teen girls in Sierra Leone. I know the embassy there has been particularly involved in supporting initiatives around teenage pregnancies under the banner of gender equality. I know that the embassy also works on nutrition and governance and education. Can you tell us, just from your perspective and your time as ambassador, what have some of the major health challenges been, and how does it feed into the mission strategy to operationalize the international development strategy, A Better World?
Thanks, Nadine. Yes, and we're actually coming to the end of our 5-year mission strategy in Sierra Leone and working really hard to develop a second mission strategy. And I think Josephine has really given us such a good context for the work that we're doing together, really, as she so rightly put it. So since 2005, the Irish government has invested more than 200 million in development initiatives in Sierra Leone. And like you've mentioned, we have 4 key focus areas at the moment: food security and nutrition, gender equality, education, and then governance and human rights. And everything that we do comes back to the empowerment of women and girls. It's the center of everything that the embassy does. And so I suppose that cooperation, it takes many forms, but I suppose 2 of the areas that I'm going to focus on today are, firstly, working very closely with government, with the Ministry of Gender and Children's Affairs, but also women's organisations and other stakeholders to look at the policy and the legal environment for women's rights and gender equality. And so with Irish support, we've seen thousands of women and adolescent girls being empowered with knowledge and life skills, like that comprehensive sexuality education that Josephine has mentioned. But also for us, partnering with local organisations like Purposeful, like Rainbow Initiative, or the Forum Against Harmful Practices. That's really, really important to us, to work to reduce gender-based violence and to ensure that survivors have access to health, psychosocial and legal supports. And, I think that the challenges that Josephine have outlined are really stark. They're really significant. We have seen some positive steps. There's been a lot more political attention paid to gender-based violence as a serious issue. And from that, we've seen changes in legislation and increased services. But of course, there's still a long way to go. And then I think that's why when we see an organization like Purposeful, we really, their call for this transformative change in gender and social norms, that really chimes with us, because I think that's how together we can drive real change. I mentioned legislative change. One of the big pieces of change that was passed last year by the Parliament was the Progressive Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act, which promotes women's leadership in all parts of society. And in the most recent parliamentary elections, we saw approximately 30% of ordinarily elected MPs being filled by women, which is a really, really positive step.
Yeah. Really, really interesting just to see how at all levels, gender and all of the different approaches and initiatives are starting to really show. And again, like I'm just listening to Josephine and the power in her voice, you can absolutely see why. Josephine, I wonder, you mentioned stigma as one of the issues. How do you practically destigmatize, particularly sexual reproductive health for young girls who are in the context of culture? They have cultural norms. They have just issues around what's morally deemed by society to be okay and not okay, and then even accessing services, particularly for young girls who need parental consent to engage in sexual reproductive health services. Can you tell us a little bit about stigma?
Well, the reality is, whatever we say, however we put it, is sex is happening, sometimes not by will, because girls who are below the age of 18 in our country's law, our sexual offences law, are not supposed to be engaged in sexual activity. But what we know is there is entrenched culture of rape in the country, which, as the ambassador has rightly stated, that over the years we've seen improvements in laws, and this improvement has not happened in isolation. They have been pushed by consolidated efforts by grassroots organizations. I hate that word, but maybe it's by organizations that are working locally in the context, by also girls and young women who are resisting in many ways. So in terms of how we address the issue of stigma, is we invest in girls' political education a lot. How do we do that at Purposeful? As the ambassador rightly mentioned, the Safe Space and Life Skills program we do. We have about 17,000 girls benefiting from our girls-only safe spaces. Within those spaces, we do what we call political education in it. With support from Irish Aid, we've been able to train 600 mentors to work with these girls in 5 districts in the country. And apart from those focused area and physical space, because we also see space as not just physical, but something also that can be virtual and all of that. We have one of the biggest radio show in the country. It's called the Karukura Connection Radio Show. Within that radio show, we kind of use it as a space for political education, talk about the issues affecting girls. We name discriminatory laws and policies, but also we call out those abuse happening to girls as abuse that are not their faults. They've been victims or survivors of violence, and we're not going to shame them for those abuse. So we kind of spark conversations that are not necessarily supposed to be controversial conversations, but because of the society we live and because of the cultural norms in the society we live, some of these conversations are referred to as taboo conversation. But in my opinion, issues that have to do with girls' rights, women's rights should not be considered taboo at all. So this is what our radio show do, our Safe Spaces programming do. We spark conversations in communities, spark them from the local level to national level. A typical example of how we've sparked conversation is our work on ending female genital mutilation in the country. So we're currently calling for explicit law that ban the practice of FGM in Sierra Leone. And so we do a lot of political education, a lot of media takeover, but also we have a way of working with people in the local community who are part of the society, who are survivors of the practice of female genital mutilation. We empower them with the skills, I'll not say the language because they have the language. We empower them maybe with a political language that is being used in policy-making spaces, so that we will not be the only one representing their views in those meetings, in those high-level conversations, so that these grassroots people, these local people, these leaders in communities will come at the forefront of those conversations. So basically, we destigmatize certain issues by just engaging in political education, sparking conversation in the community, and hosting one of the biggest radio show, holding safe spaces for girls where they come talk about issues affecting them, but within it learn life skills that will help them in lives. But also we have Girls Collective. We give them money because there's no way we shy away from the money conversation. We know a lot of issues affect girls are because of power, and because power is ultimately referred to as money also. In a context where power and money is taken away from girls, it's very difficult to uplift the lives of girls in those spaces. So yeah, basically those are the things we do to address stigmatization, to empower girls and make sure that they have the political knowledge to stand up for their rights.
Josephine, what a comprehensive description. And I just know many of the listeners here, I mean, there's so much in there that would be relevant. And I think we all have a lot to learn. All of us in all countries have a lot to learn from that program. I was just really pleased to hear you talk about, those issues underneath gender-based violence and power. There's issues about beliefs that all of us as humans have about ourselves. And I heard you say, like, it's my fault. That's such a common belief with in situations of violence, and to be able to work with young women on the level of beliefs, like there's, it's my fault or there's something wrong with me, and to really help young women to see that's not true. And then, watching empowerment come from programs like yours, those conversations you were talking about. Claire, maybe coming back to you, Josephine mentioned political education and, making sure that voices are heard in the political spaces. And I think it would be just really interesting for listeners in your role as ambassador, and you would have access and be involved in many of these conversations. How does that work? How do you translate the important learnings and messages that you hear from NGOs and from the women, for instance, that Josephine is working with to advocate for diplomacy, to advocate to make change among other donors and in the other political spaces that you would be involved in?
Yeah, really good question, Nadine. It's there are a small number of us kind of like-minded partners working together in Sierra Leone. So I think, first of all, there's really fantastic coordination between Ireland, our EU and like-minded colleagues, also within the different UN agencies. I would say as well, a big part of my job is sometimes to stop speaking and to bring in the voices of others and to amplify the voices of others as well, and to really listen and feed back what I'm hearing. I mean, one of the things that I really love that we do is working with, young women in governance networks. And often you'll hear the refrain, but we're very happy to have more women come and be in politics, but the women don't want it and they're not ready. And that's not what I hear. When we were working to support the Ministry of Gender and other agencies like UN Women, on the development of the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act, what we were hearing back was it wasn't just the women of Sierra Leone who wanted 30%. It was the women and men of Sierra Leone. And they were saying, why are we stopping at 30? It's over 50% of our population are women. So why are you limiting yourself to 30? So I think, as often you can see in countries, maybe the legislature was a little bit more hesitant than where the population was at. And I really agree so wholeheartedly with what Josephine has talked about in terms of imbalance of power and that idea of money being really critical in terms of conversations around respect and stigma. And the radio as well. That's actually, being an Irish person, and radio is so big in our homes growing up. And I still think it's really a media source that's used, that's trusted. And Sierra Leone is a country full of radio stations. And so I love that the work that Purposeful is doing on getting girls' voices on air and having their perspectives shared. So I think for me that's a big part of my role and as well, I think it's to be really consistent. I think these days, to be honest with you, any government minister that I talk to, the first thing they think about when they think about Ireland is about gender equality. So that they know why I'm coming to talk to them, and that helps too.
I think that's great. What a good reputation. And I think it's interesting as well just to see within Irish Aid, and maybe you know the answer to this, Claire, but there's a lot of Irish women ambassadors who are particularly in sub-Saharan Africa at the moment. And we've been speaking to them through this podcast series. And it's interesting. It's like we have 30%, you're mentioning 30% in the parliament there for Sierra Leone of MPs. Do you know what the percentage of women ambassadors, or do you have any idea of what that is in Irish Aid? And I know it's not, just because you have a good number of women in positions doesn't mean there is equality, but it certainly helps in terms of voice at the table.
Oh, absolutely. It's something that the department has really prioritised in recent years. So we're now at 50-50, which is a great place. Yeah, it's a really great place to be. As you say, there's far more than that if you look across sub-Saharan Africa. And then often the joke that I have with officials in ministries in Sierra Leone is there have only ever been female ambassadors. We've had I think 4 or 5 now, female heads of mission in Sierra Leone. And I think since we opened back in 2005, I think we've only ever had one male diplomat. So I think they sometimes wonder, do we have any female diplomat or any male diplomats? So yeah, but look, I think it's something around that values piece of work that really spoke to me. Anybody, I don't want to generalize, but it really spoke to me when I saw the program that we had in Sierra Leone. It just seemed so exciting and so interesting. And honestly, the sort of reason why I joined the Department of Foreign Affairs was to get out there and to work with great partners like Purposeful, to work with people like Josephine and to try to drive change for good.
Josephine, you yourself as a young woman leader in these spaces, what is it about women that's different when women are in positions of, let's say power in the way that I think we tend to understand that power? What is it? What are the key ingredients to leadership? And why do women in leadership positions matter, particularly around sexual reproductive health?
Very, very important question, and very important also to name that women that represent their constituents, the importance of them being in position of power. Apart from, big part is the representation. We know obviously that for the Sierra Leonean context, the 30% does not all of a sudden mean that progressive laws and policies are going to be passed immediately. But at least in terms of political willingness, in terms of saying the government is listening, in terms of saying our people are in that parliament. And before now, there was only 19 women in Sierra Leone parliament. And way before then, it was much lesser also. And we know that during the Civil War and after the Civil War, immediately after the Civil War, a lot of women's organizations came together, organized. They kept calling for this 30% quota, which in my opinion, I think should be shifted to 50. But again, it's a starting step, and we celebrate that. So clearly representation is very important. I give you a typical example. When I started working at Purposeful, I was pregnant, young in my early 20s, very pregnant. This organization just hired a pregnant young woman. And in Sierra Leonean context, it's very, very rare for an organization to invest money in pregnant women as staff because, they have their opinions, their thoughts about how we're going to be tired all the time, sleeping all the time, how in their mind, our brain don't function well because we're pregnant. So as a young pregnant woman stepping into leadership role in this office, and immediately there was this grant making process, and I sat at a panel and I saw lots of men came in to pitch about what young women, young teenage mothers, young pregnant women need in their communities. And as they were pitching, I was very confused because they have no idea what it feels like to be pregnant. They can never live and walk through the shoes of girls and young women. So immediately I questioned it. And that's what we have at Purposeful, is when we sit in this position of power as young people who represent our constituents, we question things, we call out the nonsense that we see. We say, why is it that men are pitching for young women? Where are the girls? We ask the question, where are the girls? Where are the young mothers? Where are the pregnant young girls? Should they come at the forefront of this conversation? So clearly representation is important, because I am in that space. I ask the right question because I am in that space when they are trying to make solutions for girls and young women. I question myself, will it really work for young women and girls? So I want to believe that it's going to be the same in Parliament too, because women are in that space, they can ask the right question. But apart from that, there is very strong support system. The activist community, women's rights movement, the feminist women's rights movement is growing in Sierra Leone. Purposeful at the center of it, but all the other partners we work with nationally, locally, community level, it's growing. So we all spaces for these women who are representing our views in Parliament. So they are not alone. So when we see things not working well, we're going to call it out, but we are also grateful to tell government officials that we have the capacity to support, like what happened with the inclusion in school policy. We called out government. We say this law is discriminatory. We mobilize with the female caucus in Parliament so that they can be our support system within that space. We lobby government officials. We brought men over to our side. But at the end of the day, after taking the case to the ECOWAS court and there were ruling, we were also graceful to tell the government that we have the capacity to help you draft this policy. So I want to name that when we say we is very radical feminist organization. We're not the kind that shuts people off and say, we're not open to learning and say, your ways are so bad, we don't tolerate it. We don't tolerate, but at the end of the day, we say, we are in a learning journey. We want to learn with you. We want to support you in this journey. And so that's how we, as well as the team from Irish Aid, we coordinated the Coalition for Girls' Education. It had over 40 organizations that were very committed in not only calling out government, but also writing best approach solutions. But those writings were clearly informed by the girls who were directly affected by that policy.
So well spoken, Josephine. It just really, really resonates. The language you used, we call it out and we gracefully engage in conversations. It just feels powerful. There's that powerful in the word empowerment that we use so often. So thank you for that. Claire, I'm just going to come back to you and ask, it's coming to the end of your tenure as ambassador, and we'd love to hear just a little bit about what are some of the things, maybe even one thing that you're most proud of during your time as ambassador, and what legacy are you leaving now for the incoming ambassador?
Well, that's such a great question. It's something I think I've been reflecting a lot on and will continue to reflect on, as time passes and you, I suppose, are able to have greater objectivity. It's a whole range of things, really. I think professionally, being invited to speak alongside His Excellency the President on the platform the day he signed the GEWE Act, Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act, into law. I suppose that was recognising, the role that we had played, but much more than that, it was seeing a room full of women who had campaigned for so long, and men too, but particularly seeing the women's groups there and seeing what had been achieved together. I think another big thing actually is just the level of engagement that we've had as an embassy. One of the big things I wanted to do was just do a lot more communicating with people. So I've travelled all over the country. I think the only area I haven't been to is Banff Island. That's still on my list. So whether that's something I get to before I go or merits a trip back. But having been, all over this beautiful country, it's about the same size as Ireland, obviously bigger population. I've just really enjoyed, I suppose, meeting people, talking to them, finding commonalities. I'm really proud of my team as well. I think, diplomats, we come and go, but we've got this fantastic team of, at the embassy, whether that's our senior program advisors or whether that's our admin team. Just really, I think, proud of that spirit of a team working together for a common purpose, which at the end of the day is it being part of that journey of empowering Sierra Leonean women and girls. I think the very last, it's a personal thing. I'm really proud that I came with my family, that my kids got a chance to see how beautiful Sierra Leone is, and just to see, a very different life. And I think to broaden their perspectives as well.
Oh, that's great, Claire. Thank you so much for sharing. It's fantastic to hear just what a good experience you've had, both professionally and personally. And we're really looking forward to Irish Aid's continued work in Sierra Leone. So just coming to the end of this episode, we would like to finish with a question to each of you. Josephine, I might come to yourself first and ask you, if you had a last message or a call to action for our listeners. Our listeners are a broad range of people who are really passionate about global health and about creating a better world. What would your final message be for them?
I think one of the most important benefits that young women and girls can have is autonomy and rights over our bodies. Is having the liberty to be able to make decisions over our bodies, our lives, decision about sex, about contraception, about choosing when to have babies, if we want to have babies. I want to name that because I know a lot of work has been going on about safe abortion rights in Sierra Leone, about girls having access to those life-sustaining services that they need to thrive. This might seem very minimal, but it's not simple or usual for girls and young women to get. And yes, we do need it, because when we do have it, it contributes to education, to economic empowerment. It helps us break the cycle of intergenerational gendered poverty. In a country where a majority of the population is women, and almost half of which are adolescent girls, we cannot afford to not make access to these services available to girls. We cannot afford to not give girls the political education to know what they need for themselves and be able to choose for themselves. And ultimately, sexual and reproductive health rights is something we should be promoting. So I continue to celebrate the partnership we have with Irish Aid, but I also continue to use the space to call for more support. We've proven already that we are organizing, that girls are leading the change, that young women are at the center of this conversation. We've proven that a local organization can lead some of this very progressive work in Sierra Leone and in all the other spaces we work. So I just call for more partnership and engagement in promoting this for young women and girls.
Oh, thank you, Josephine. That's a super message and very important for our listeners to hear. Finally, Claire, just coming back to you, same question. Your very last word, your message, your call to action to our listeners.
Sure. So I think the message that's come through really clearly in this podcast is that so many of those health problems facing adolescent girls and young women, they're due to prevailing gender and social norms, and we have to transform those if we're going to see sustained improvements in women and girls' health. And those changes to social and gender norms, like FGM and cutting, or like abortion rights that Josephine just mentioned, they're not easy. We know they're not easy, but that's not an excuse, because with sustained long-term efforts, they can happen. We saw the overturn of the ban on pregnant schoolgirls, like Josephine mentioned, and transforming those gender norms, it's essential to gender equality, to women's empowerment, to improved health outcomes for women. And my very final point is, that benefits everybody. It doesn't just benefit the over 50% of Sierra Leone's population that are women and girls. It benefits everybody, and that's something I think we can all get behind for a better Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Claire. I love that. That message, gender equality benefits everybody. Such an important message. Just wanted nothing left to do except to thank Josephine and Claire for your time today, and for giving us such an engaging discussion. It's been wonderful to have you on the episode. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me too. Really enjoyed it and learnt as well, as I always do. From conversations with Josephine, with Purposeful, I too have learnt. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Claire.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of another enlightening episode of Better Health for a Better World. We hope you enjoyed our exploration of the remarkable global health projects and programs supported by the Government of Ireland. Remember, by investing in the health and well-being of communities around the globe, we not only create a better world for those in need, but also foster a more interconnected and compassionate planet. We encourage you to stay engaged and to take action, as each of us has the power to make a difference. Thank you for joining us on this journey towards better health for a better world.